Welcome back, this is John Holdsworth here in New Zealand and my little one Millie. I was meaning to shoot this quick video while she was having her afternoon nap. Oh, I know. I was on the channel yesterday for Stokeshed. I'll put the link in the description to his channel, and made a comment saying the only chance I get to do these is while she has her 30-minute nap. And he said, well, that's your challenge, to try and actually do that over this weekend. And so I took up the challenge and I gave it a try, but she's awake. It didn't even last that long. So here she is, but she's going to go off and have some lunch, and I'm going to get into a video which is looking at what I shot on the GH5S last week. One particular video clip that I hadn't played around with, and when I had a look at it yesterday, I was blown away with what I could do in terms of color grading with the 400 megabit per second, 10bit 4K 422 file. I've come from the GH4, so it's really worlds apart in terms of what you can do to push and pull the image to color grade it. Hey look, we've even got the crayons, so we can do some color grading. Should we do that? You want to do some color grading with us? All right, so this one's going to go have some lunch and we'll get into it. I'm back now with a video looking at some footage that I shot last week on the new Panasonic Lumix GH5S. If you saw my last video, there was an intro to how I got a chance to play with that very briefly with Richard Wong, local photographer who was one of the lucky ones to get to test it. So I got a few shots. I was just meeting him at lunchtime to get some footage to try out. I'm coming from a GH4, so one thing I wanted to do was check out the 400 megabit per second shooting mode in 4K, 10-bit 422. Now that's something which is on the GH5 as well, so before I go any further, this isn't a comparison video to the GH5 for those who are considering the new GH5S. This is probably more relevant to people who, like me, may be coming from a GH4 or from another camera system and thinking, well, hey, the GH5S has got some pretty amazing capabilities in terms of low light, and thinking, well, what could sway them towards it. I'm not trying to make your mind up for you, I'm just going to point out something which, for me, coming from the GH4, fantastic camera, but I love my grading, so for me this is a really great feature. So I didn't expect it to be this good. I knew it'd be better compared to the GH4, but it's a real jump ahead. I mean, I've always said if I ever could, I'd love to work with raw footage, but huge file sizes, data storage, it's going to become expensive as well. And I've done a bit of playing around with raw footage in the past, and this actually starts to feel like I'm editing raw footage. It's that much better compared to the GH4. So with GH4 footage, if I really pushed the shadows too much, if I pulled down the highlights too much, if I added too much of a heavy grade with color correction, really boosting saturation, and it would fall apart. The image would become quite blotchy, really sort of pixelated, and you'd get a lot of noise coming into the image. It would literally just fall apart because there's not enough color information in that data stream to go as far as sometimes I'd want to. I don't consider myself a professional color grader, but I love getting creative with it, particularly for my cinematograph work. So this footage that I shot, it's a very simple, quick shot I got down at the park. I was shooting on my 42.5 Nocticron lens. I did notice a bit of fringing around some of the blown out whites around some of the subjects, but I think that was actually the polarizer filter which I've got on that, which I think was causing that. But otherwise, it came out extremely sharp. Beautiful shot. One thing, if you notice when I play it back, it also jumps the focus back and forth because it was using body tracking, which apparently is a new feature on the GH5S as well. You won't see it on this video, but on the camera, on on the screen, you can see the bodies are all outlined by this vertical rectangle as it tracks the bodies and it jumps. But what I found, it was jumping back and forth because there was a few people here walking forwards and a few people walking back towards me. So it was jumping between the two, didn't work perfectly, so you'll see that the focus jumps around quite a lot. But what we're really looking at here is the color grading. So let's have a look on the timeline here. I've already done the actual adjustment layers, but what I'm going to do is just turn them on and off so that you can see the difference and pull back and forth a few of the actual effects. So at the moment it's switched off, and as you can see, straight away it's quite blown out in the whites on her shirt, her top. There's no detail in there, it's completely blown out. On the GH4 I would not be able to rescue the details from that, but in this footage I could. And you also see in this shot it's very contrasty. There's a lot of black, a lot of darks there in the shadows around the trees in the background. So let's have a look. If I switch on the adjustment layer, and it brings back this, what to me looks more like a cinematic image. It's a lot flatter, not as contrasty, but that is where you get more dynamic range. And I've been able to pull out so much more dynamic range from this image. It wasn't shot in Vlog. I wish I had done that as a test, but I forgot to switch it on. But this is actually almost a better test because it's showing from the standard camera setting, what can you get out of the image. So having a look at the actual video effects using lumetri color. I've not done too much in the way of LUTs. Initially I just played around here with highlights, so I've actually pulled the highlights here down to 120. So if I pull that back up to 0 again, you see how it's blowing out the highlights again. So if I pull that on the GH4, if I pulled that down too much, it would just completely flatten the image. But I can pull this almost right down to its max of 150. And it's really bringing back a lot of the details in the highlights of her top. Likewise, I've pulled down the whites, because again, that's going to blow it out. So I've pulled that right down. And then first thing I do is often go into the shadows. So if I pull the shadows back, you see they're a lot more crushed. But if I start pulling them up, I'm starting to get, if I go really far, I mean, look at how much detail there is actually in those shadows in the background. I mean, it ruins the image. But if you wanted to selectively, bring out details in an area using masking where you can, you could do that. And if I actually zoom in, let's go even to 200%. So up here in the trees, sure you get a bit of fringing, but there's no obvious blotchiness. I mean, if I actually play back that file, and you're not seeing any real noise, any blotchiness coming through, it's still a very nice looking image, and that's with those shadows really pushed up hard. So if I bring this back again, so let's just fix those shadows, that was a bit too much, bring them back up to, I think I've had about 50, and come back out. Actually, let's go over to the shirt. So looking at the highlights again here, so if I bring this back to where it was, in fact if I just switch this on and off, and I bring the highlights back down again, and those whites, and then I switch this on and off again, you see how much it's actually rescued down. I would probably color correct that a little bit to take some of the magenta. Pulling the image that much, it's brought a bit of magenta into it, so I would fix that, perhaps with some selective color correction. And I've also brought in film convert. So if you see, if I switch film convert off, it's a lot more bright, vivid saturation, because I'd also bumped up the saturation. So what I want to do is also bring it back to a more cinematic looking image. So I come back out to fit that on screen. It looks very saturated, it looks really punchy, but it looks too video to me. And this is where film convert, fantastic plugin for Premiere, After Effects. And it just brings it down to this really nice muted colors on the image. So the greens, they still look beautiful green. I think I've actually then gone in and I've actually added something else to make that green a little bit nicer too. So additionally, I've gone in and I've done some selective work on the greens here. I've used this tool here to try and selectively change the green itself. So by using this, you can selectively say, well, these are the green areas and I want to adjust those. And by using that mask, selective, it's only going to apply this correction here to the green areas. So the standard was back there, it's a little bit yellower. So what I did was just pull it down a little bit more to the blue so that it's a slightly more minty, almost bluey green, which I think looks a little bit more like old vintage film. I just like that, it's a subtle difference. So that's another little tweak I did to it. I haven't done an awful lot more on this, but film convert, I'll often pull that down so it's not the full film color, because that to me is almost muting the color, it's changing the colors too much in the image. So I pull it down to maybe sort of 50%, and I'll often bring the curves down a bit as well. So that's zero and then back up to 100%. But this one I quite like the full curves on the film convert plugin, because it's actually brought more of the contrast back into it. It's crushing the blacks back down a little bit more, but it's actually giving it a better contrast in general. So if I have a playback on this video, and you'll get a better sense of it. Again, you can see it's a bit jumpy, it's not playing back perfectly with the screen recording going on at the same time, but it's handling it pretty well. 400 megabit per second file. So there you have it. It's a really beautiful file to work with, and like I said, you can probably get this on the GH5. I've not tried this on the GH5. This is the first time I've tried with the GH5S. So for people that are looking to do some really good grading on their footage, either is going to be a great option. As I mentioned in my last video, GH5S is a variation on the GH5, so if it suits your purposes without image stabilization, without IBIS, and if you want the low light capabilities, then that's great. That's probably what I'm leaning towards at this stage. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to make a choice when it's released. And if you want image stabilization, if you do the sort of shooting that requires that and you don't want to use a gimbal, then GH5 is still a fantastic camera. And I'm pretty certain you can get that same level of grading in that camera. But if, like me, you come from the GH4 or another camera system, that could be a deciding factor, because I know that a lot of cameras, even like the Sony, are still 8-bit. They don't have that high bit rate on them. And some people say it's unlikely they will get that, because with full frame, you've got a lot more data from that sensor, that larger sensor to deal with. So whether they would actually be able to process that much data on a full frame sensor with 10-bit, 400 megabit per second, it's hard to imagine they could, but you never know. With the A7S III due to come out sometime this year, you might want to wait for that. Even from Canon cameras, trying to do heavy grading on them, they don't have that level of data to work with. So unless you're then jumping up to RAW or outputting to external recorders with high bit rates, this is a fantastic option. So there you go. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you again soon. What is that?